Hi everyone, please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it. Thank you. The cycle I'm talking about in this video is the same as in the last video, the Neptune cycle, but here I'm addressing it from a totally different perspective, and yet I feel that it addresses an issue that may be critical toward the ultimate resolution of the very conflicted period we're living through. And so, as I said in the previous video, the Neptune cycle in Aries, the military buildup, the fact that it was there during the period of the American Civil War, and now we are re-experiencing that conflict. Because if you look at it today, in a sense, it's not that different. There is a racial divide underneath all the so-called cultural conflict. It's really that. And bottom line, what is Trumpism but a form of white nationalist, supremacist, tilting toward fascist, autocratic behavior? But pondering these years that we've been in, starting around 2011, Neptune enters Pisces. And what I recall, because I was already quite attentive to the political scene back then, as I tracked the Obama administration in 2011, we were getting ready for the 2012 election. But what happened in 2011, to my mind, reflects Neptune and Pisces really well, is this tremendous upsurge of information flow. But as what often happens with these planets, you see both ends of the spectrum. You see the good and you see the bad. And indeed, this is true in individual charts as well. And from my vantage point, it's how I understand astrology. The task of every individual is to discover how to operate on the high end of their own planets, at which point their fate likewise adapts and you produce much better results. Nevertheless, all planets, all signs have a high end and a low end, and in the world at large, you tend to see both of these features at the same time. And so upsurge of information. So for example, 2011 and forward, platforms like this, YouTube, began to really grow. More and more people were putting forth their ideas. And this is actually good. I can recall decades ago searching for information in the back of a small occult bookstore or something to find some astrology book or some other thing. In other words, there's a lot of work involved and essentially a lack of information flow. But with the advent of this kind of audio video projection into the world, a lot of that is now available in multiple ways, in many directions, different points of view. It's fabulous in that sense. The problem is the same planet, Neptune, and realize that Neptune, very, very high end, this is the most peaceful planet, peaceful seeking planet. And so in that sense, it's great. But as it starts to descend from there, it makes its way to the very bottom where Neptune's very open-ended, accepting energy is hijacked by people who operate out of that side, out of the malevolent side, and they turn it into deception, gaslighting, con games, all of that, terrible, terrible approach to life. Basically, the way of the liar, extremely well represented by our current president. That's exactly what he does. He doesn't just corrupt that planet, he corrupts them all, but he corrupts that one especially well, or especially importantly, in the sense that it's so intensely wired in his chart. He's a Gemini, Mercury squares Neptune. Neptune is in a station at birth. It's loaded for trouble, basically. in terms of the way he uses it. But separately overall, it's the era we're in, because I remember in 2011, as we had the Tea Party generation coming into Congress, the lying accelerated tremendously. There had been some in 2010, through the media wing that supports the GOP at the time and continues to, Fox News, etc. Some, but this really took on a new level. In fact, I remember Ted Cruz, who was part of that incoming group of Congress people, and he was literally doing what they do now with regularity, telling you the total opposite of what is happening. I remember Ted Cruz shutting down the government and accusing Democrats of doing so. And I remember thinking, this is nuts. I mean, we're all watching it on TV. We know that it was you guys that did it, and now you're saying Democrats did it. So this continued to increase until eventually, with Neptune at the time about a third of its way into the Pisces period, brings in Trump, and we've been in this ever since. And we still are. Now, I did say in the last video that Neptune is in Aries, and this correlates with the rise in the militant energy, wars, etc. That's true. But it's in Aries this year from the spring to about the last month of the year or so, whereupon it comes back into Pisces before next year in the spring in 2026, finally going back into Aries and staying there where it'll be until 2038. It's a 13-year cycle. And so we're not quite finished with the Pisces period. And here's where you see the potential positive outcome, because Neptune and Pisces, through the way Neptune operates on the downside, my sense is that it can, and in fact, indeed it has, correlated with an acceptance of untruth, of lies, of disinformation on a level that we haven't seen in a long time. But my sense is that as it goes into Aries, which on the one hand does ramp up the trouble, because we're during the Pisces period, it's all talk, it's all basically circulating disinformation. Now it's turned into action. And then this is why you see more militancy. But nevertheless, it is the next sign. It moves away from that approach to the world, which is to lie, disinform, and so forth. In other words, it can become less popular or even outright rejected as a counterpoint, as something not to do, which I think is probably really, really important if we're going to get out of this mess. Because as long as entire sections of the media thrive on literally inventing things and telling you the opposite of what is going on, and in the current situation, this is what the GOP and especially Trump are doing regularly. Case in point, you all know about this failed parade of his that at most maybe featured tens of thousands of people, possibly, although a number of people that I tuned into said at most it was 10 or 20,000 and no more than that. But according to the communications person, that very strange individual, I think his name is Stephen Chung, in his cabinet, in his administration, according to him, there were 250,000 people there, which is completely untrue. Well, this is one example, but there are many, many examples such as this, where they're constantly turning the information upside down and telling you the opposite of what is going on, which of course is very damaging to the country, because the era we're in, media is very divided, and so that section of the media only hears that message, or mostly hears that message, and so the situation continues in this sense. So here's where we have to hope that the Neptune switching signs will change the landscape. My feeling is that it indeed will do that, because that's how these planets work. When you get into the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and more especially Neptune and Pluto, because they stay in a sign longer. So then they tend to define periods for a longer period of time. And so as they switch, you get big switches. And the move away from disinformation to truth would be, of course, extremely welcome. And I suspect help turn the US around and probably the world as well as we move into future years.